AI systems are everywhere now, but the people actually accountable for delivering them, navigating incomplete signals, misaligned teams, and decisions that have to be made before anyone has the full picture. Those voices are mostly invisible. This is Agentic AI Execution. I'm Leena Agarwal. I spent 18 years as a TPM at Amazon, Meta, Cruise, and Woven by Toyota. I started this show because the most honest conversations I have made about AI execution happened in hallways, Slack threads, and none of them were made public. No frameworks, no hype. Real judgment call from people who have made them. Today is our very first episode. I couldn't have asked for a better way to start. My guest today is Jenny Truong. She has been with Meta for 14 years, working on different products like search, marketplace. I'm very excited to have her here as the first guest. Jenny, thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Lena. I'm so excited that we're talking today.
I would like to understand, when did you see the shift in your 14 years journey at Meta where things started changing from systems to AI?
Yeah, to your point, I spent a long time at Meta, 14 years. And to me, at that company, it felt like things were constantly changing. So I can't say there was like a maybe moment, but definitely sort of seeing shifts happening and then trying to make decision points of how shall we and what shall we do. I discussed this a bit back about a framework I often use called the APP framework. APP stands for Acknowledge, Plan, and Pivot. So when I worked on various products at Meta, I joined the teams when they were in various phases of maturity. And I think that made a difference in terms of when things were leveraging AI and when things weren't. So, for example, I joined the Newsfeed team. It's a pretty, mature, tenured product. It knew what it was doing before the days of AI, before ranking was, ranking in the current form. And so I think the sort of shift at that time required a very tenured, mature team to then realize when and shall we make these such shifts, and then how do we build the systems and leverage what we have, right? And so that's sort of maybe that team's point in time. Whereas when I joined the stories team, it was a brand new product, right? Like there were other competitors out there, but building out the stories product, everything was a new feature. So building an AI alongside other new features, right? Like time of display, where we want the placement of the product, all those things. It was naturally part of the evolution of that product. So, really, in both cases, what I really thought about with this question is, when do we acknowledge that it is an appropriate time to sort of shift, right? If now is the time, which we know for the current world, acknowledging that you got to do it or that it can be beneficial is the first part. And sometimes I think it varies because some people are more or less ready, especially when you're on a product that's quite mature and you've done things the way you've done things. So the acknowledgement by the team, I think, is huge. Then you can build the plan and then make those pivots, which will be different depending on the product or team. So the key, right, where we are today is to be okay with change, because being complacent is not an option. And so while there wasn't a moment, I do think the when and how is quite important if you're on products today that are either being created or can be innovated.
That's a great point. I love how you described the APP framework. I'm curious, how do I decide to switch between AI, and is this the good time now to switch to AI? There are multiple outages happening everywhere because of quality associated with AI models. So, how do we decide that this is the right AI product to build and now is the time?
Well, I think we probably know, especially if we're in the tech world, that there's no better time than now to use AI. But I will say that different industry teams, they're at the very stages. So there are some companies where I talk to and they're not using it at all. And then there are other companies that it's like, how can we use it as much as fast and more often as possible? And so I do think the important thing is if you're being intentional and acknowledging that now is the time, if it is the time for your product or area or team, then doing that work to figure out if this system is the one for you. I mean, even in my own personal life, I'm frankly not using a ton of AI. I'm currently on pause in work. And so I guess I could use it to clean my photos and other things, but then I have to decide, right? What is the system that I want to use and how much of it do I trust? And so we do know it's coming. The question really is like, do you have the energy to learn the thing and the scaffolding in place where you're at, either personally or professionally, to do that? Because some companies embracing it and other companies are actually not in that phase. And so I think it does vary, but there's no question that you could do it and learn AI now on your own time if you didn't have those opportunities at work.
That's wonderful. How do I distinguish if I want to learn? There are a lot of throwaway product which can be built, as you were saying. It's not going to create that sticky product where I want to keep coming back. How do I create that product where I'm focusing on an excellent execution while building that product?
Yeah. So I think there's two things in terms of what you're describing. One is like the stickiness and effectiveness of a product. I think you'll still need to figure out like what is a successful product in, between you amongst your teams and all that. And so whether using AI or not, figuring out that baseline foundation set of metrics for that. But then when you're deciding, okay, if I'm going to use an AI tool or system to make this product or be part of this journey, and what signals you use there, I think thinking about it, you can look at the data side, which I think if you have the metrics and the foundation, you can look at, compare, or set goals. The other, I think, big component or signal is on the people side, because just because you have a set of data doesn't mean that the people are going to trust the AI system you're using. And so how can you leverage these two sides of these signals to build trust with any system you're using, right? Because to your point, there's like outages, failures, other things. And sometimes it's, well, what is it doing? And we've seen plenty of movies that AI goes crazy, but actually you can build systems and metrics and measurements in place, right? We're not going out there and building out, leveraging AI and having it auto approve everything before you allow it to delete all your photos or email your friends or, clean up your contact list. So I think the one side is making sure that you have clear metrics. How do you measure success? What are the goals you're looking to achieve before you introduce AI and then after? And so I think doing checkpoints, that makes sense. The people side, you'll start to notice if you are building enough trust of the system based on you're working with the teams, right? Is engineer asking a ton of questions regarding the data that you're getting? Is the data science sort of questioning the logic of the data being used? For your partner teams, there are different people involved in this process. And do you get more or less questions, right? Because as the TPM, you're the center hub. And so depending on the type of questions, you can tell if it's an actual question on product market fit or if it's actually trust in the systems that you're using. And I think both sides are a quite important set of signals to use.
I totally agree with you. The point you were mentioning, particularly making sure data science team, engineering team, everybody stays aligned and are asking enough questions. I've been in situation personally when I ran TPM programs. Sometimes it's hard to have the teams ask me those questions or move on with the program when I know there is not still full alignment and we have to continue because there is a strict deadline on AI execution which needs to accomplish. Either we
Yes.
have to demo to customers or we have to show the product for the next milestones so that we can give a green light to factory for production. I'm
Yes.
curious, how do you feel the TPM roles evolving?
Yeah, I do think the TPM role, the part where you're describing building alignment, setting expectations, planning goals, that part is still going to be very necessary, right? You could have the AI go on and survey a bunch of people, automate and like aggregate like all that information. But the part that people value is the connection and partnerships part. right? So filling out a bunch of surveys and then automating, getting production outcome of things is one thing. So I think, but the other is like the TPM building those relationships so you can have that first point of contact for trust, and then introducing the systems is sort of the next part. So I think the role of TPM, parts where we'll become more efficient, is leveraging some of the tools to do all the aggregation, right? So the common goals, and making sure that the content that you're capturing in various places are sort of automated and summarized and notes and all those things. So I think we can become more efficient so that we can do the sort of people, empathy, connection, trust building parts that we as humans can uniquely do because of the relationships we can build with people. So hopefully then the more operational, sort of rigorous, repeatable tasks can be done by the AI systems. And so I think then as a TPM, building enough trust on the tools you're using for when you can let go of some tasks that you're normally doing to give it to the systems to do. But I do think TPM's role is evolving, but so are all many other roles, where how can you leverage the AI tools to be doing the better version or best version of your job function? Can designers design without having to design all the detail? They still need to use judgment and look at the various like designs put out by Figma or whatever sort of system you're using. So I do think evolution is happening or will happen depending on where you're at.
I love it. The way you framed, we should, as a TPM, use AI as a tool, automate some of the manual things like report generation, coordination work with dashboards. Those processes can be automated. But where a TPM still needs to be involved is that judgment aspect, critical thinking aspect, alignment aspect.
Yeah, you hit it on the nail for sure. I think those sort of things, thinking, right, is going to be really important. Problem solving, identifying sort of the nuances and subtleties that happen across teams and meetings and communications. Like, can we inject some of that into the work that we're doing?
Awesome. Any advice if I'm running a lot of programs, AI programs these days, which are on tight timeline? How do I develop those critical judgment or thinking and move fast with the programs I am working on?
Yeah, I do think oftentimes I find, and I've seen this happen in my own sort of like family and kid and husband, and where we jump into execution mode, right? We get some joy out of, or I do, get joy out of completing tasks, moving along, getting to the timeline, getting it done. And so there is definitely that sort of component to any sort of program. But getting it done versus getting the right thing done, I think is even more important. And so taking a step back, looking at the big picture and making sure we're solving the right problem in that program, right? Because if you're not doing the right prompts and feeding the right information into the system, you could potentially be executing and delivering on a problem that was not that critical, was quite small, didn't really matter to the cohorts, right? And so taking the time to do the proper planning and thinking about those use cases and scenarios, like what are the problems you are trying to solve, not try to boil the ocean to ensure everything is comprehensive, but making sure that you think and there's, if there are many involved, to understand the true problem that you're trying to solve, the sort of audience you're trying to solve for, and then what is success in terms of outcome? Because I bet you, if you have a lot of stakeholders, right? And with any program, but any AI system, you have the hardware side, you have the software side, you have the data side, you have financial side, you have all these things of involvement in teams. What is the problem you're trying to solve, aligned and agreed upon by all these stakeholders? And then does success look the same for them and you? Because that, I feel, it can be the pitfall, right? Where the most successful TPMs I've seen in the past are, no matter how hairy, sticky, complex the problem is, the alignment of the problem with the stakeholders has ensured success and clarity, because everyone's like, got it, yes, this is success for us. This is the high level sort of problem that we're trying to solve, and success for each partner team could be slightly different, but ladders up to the in totality what the outcome is.
Totally agree with you on everything you said. That was great advice. I want to shift gears a little bit around where I'm the only woman. I'm curious, how do I stand out? How can I challenge status quo better so that we get better alignment early on in those discussions and be a voice in the room? Not coming out as aggressive, but rather trying to find that alignment among different stakeholders.
Yeah, I think that it is really important going in prepared, right? Knowing the content, knowing what it is that the team is trying to solve. And sometimes it's actually helpful to sort of know backgrounds of the various sort of stakeholders and sort of their interests, right? So for me, I try to do a little bit of like pre work just to make sure that I feel prepared so I could stand my ground. So that's just personal to me. And then the other thing is then being curious, asking questions, and then sort of making statements at that after that, right? And so being open and willing to hear feedback. Sometimes I repeat what someone has said. Hey, from what I hear, this is what you're saying. Does this sound accurate? And so I think it does come off and it could be a little bit softer, but I don't think there's necessarily something off if you're sort of quote unquote aggressive. I think what it is like being direct, clear, state the facts, and share what you know so that you feel confident in speaking up in the room. Because sometimes what you're describing is if you're uncertain and you lack that clarity or sort of confidence to speak up, that does show also just in your composure when you're speaking, right? So the things you need to do things to build your own level of confidence and certainty. I've definitely gone to meetings where I have no idea what they're talking about. I could be senior, I could be junior. In both cases, I just have no idea, right? And so I have pushed myself to pay attention to some sort of key things and make sure that I ask questions because I don't have to know it all. And there have been times when I've been quite senior, but I felt intimidated because I don't understand the topic deeply. And so I commit to, okay, I'm gonna ask the question, get some clarity, in those meetings and hold myself accountable to that goal. And then afterwards, do follow up so I can go deeper with specific individuals. And that is just a practice I needed to do to build confidence for myself, right? Because if I don't speak up, I'll just definitely have no presence. And so, setting personal goals, also building in sort of tactics and tools that work for you to ensure that you feel good about being able to speak up.
Wow, there is a lot to unpack there. You mentioned about a point I've been thinking a lot recently around curiosity, shifting to scientific mindset, having that curious mindset when challenging the status quo. I personally struggle. How do I know my questions are of good quality and how can I sometimes bring it to the room full of folks who are already in a conflicting situations about certain topic and I know will stir the pot even further. How do I have that scientific mindset, curious mindset, help the team steer in the right direction?
Yeah. I think there is that one piece you described for yourself, which is okay, in your head, you were thinking, is it right or wrong question? I think that is sort of a battle, so no one else, thankfully, in the room knows this is happening. And so I think some tactics that work for me is thinking about for the question, because, you hear this like, no question is a bad question, but what you're trying to decide is like, do I ask this question for my self learning, or do I ask this question to help move this along? Or if I ask this question, it may not move the team along. And so I do think there is a time and a place for question asking for the type of question. So if it is a question that is often only for your self learning, you could ask it in the room, but you could also do it in a one on one setting after. But if you do think it's a question that could help the set of people, the audience in the room, where it could move it forward and be beneficial, because ultimately it sounds like that's what you're trying to do in this scenario, then I would ask that question. And I think the noise in your head about good or bad question already hopefully will die down a little because you're thinking at least about the audience and the benefits of that. And so that's sort of one strategy is like, is this going to help move the set of people in the room forward because they themselves are having conflict. And then sometimes you ask a question mostly to them to help them sort of come to alignment, which is what are we trying to solve? Or does this help with our current situation? Right. And so some more like open ended questions so then they can reflect. And sometimes you just like break up the sort of chaos that's happening in the room at the moment.
I love it. Yeah, it's also about settling my own noise in the head and keep moving forward when I know this is the right thing to do for the program given point.
Yes, yes. And I think that if you mentioned there's a lot of noise, I think we probably think about it like all the different questions and sort of facets related to it. The great thing is no one else can hear that but you. And then the reminder is like, what do I need to get done? Because the outcome of this set meeting that you're having is to do what? XYZ. And does this contribute towards getting you to the outcome? And then that way, hopefully that can help steer your mind a little bit into the sort of clarity, depending on what you're trying to get out at the end of a meeting. Because some of the tactics I've used in the past, I pre plan my meeting with the goal in mind. I would like Leena to do A, John to do B, Jill to do C. Or by the end of this meeting, I would like to see us go from this decision to this decision or have a decision. Whatever it might be, my sort of planning in advance to get to that outcome has clarity for me for that meeting. So then when I have these questions, I often think, okay, does it ladder up to that? Does it really feed into this like conversation or is it going to be detrimental? So having that pre-planning meeting before the meeting can also be helpful.
Wonderful. I'd like to end with one final question. There are a lot of candidates who are looking for AI TPM role at this point of time, and there is unemployment increasing as well. I'm curious from your perspective. What's your take? I'm an individual in the job market out right now. Should I be switching my career to AI TPM? Should I stay as a AI TPM and keep growing there? What advice you have for the folks who want to switch into AI TPM or who feel that AI TPMs are plateaued and where should they evolve their journey?
Yeah, I think that's such a the AI TPM title, it can be broad because you could be a TPM at a company that is leveraging AI for their operations or the tools and systems are quite integrated. Then you could be in a company where they actually haven't spearheaded that yet and they're looking for people to start that. So you can have the sort of innovations or discovery, curiosity sort of focus. And so you could be the head or lead of that because I can tell you that it's not solved. Many companies who are even doing AI haven't quite sorted out, right? Like how much, how little, and what. Then you could also be a TPM that joins a company that is building AI products for different sort of use cases and scenarios. So, but you may personally not even be working on very closely some of those tools depending on sort of the area or product you're in, right? I would really focus on the depending on what your interest is, what is it that you're trying to learn? Which area of AI is the thing that is interesting to you? And then sort of vetting the job description related to that because there are companies that are using AI a ton or trying to or pushing employees to use them. And then there are companies that aren't using them at all and somewhere in the middle, depending on the industry, right? So, depending on your own career aspirations, are you the kind that wants to be the start from scratch? Are you the one that want to be part of the set of like, roadmap that's already going? I think that would decide where you might want to go. And then there are only a finite number of AI sort of bigger companies that are having open roles. So if you don't do that, is that it? I don't think so. But then what is it that you're interested in learning? And that I think can help you more clearly filter out or look for opportunities.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jenny, for the insightful conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today, and I feel so much energized knowing where we are going in the AI world as a TPM and what we should be doing going forward as a TPM to keep wearing that head about bringing everybody together, cross functional alignment. This is the type of thing I was looking to achieve, and Thank you, Jenny, for being the first guest and making this an excellent conversation.
Thank you so much for doing this podcast, talking about these topics. I think that everyone is trying to understand AI, where it's at, where it's going, and nobody has a crystal ball. So we really cannot predict what is happening. But I do know that with any change in technology within our industries, that curiosity mindset is going to be really important. The other thing, advice I'd give is you might not be in the headspace to learn all these things now. And I think that is like okay to a point. And therefore, my sort of advice is how do you create space, mental capacity to learn new things? Because it's no joke. There is a lot to learn. There's no, perfect playbook. You could learn lots of things for hours and hours and days and weeks and months and never feel like the expert. But if you don't have the mental capacity to learn, then really focus on how do you create that capacity? What do you need to do to set that up for yourself? If there is so many balls in the air, how do you work on sort of how do you catch more or practice? And so that's also really important. You may not be ready. Well, what do you do to get ready? And then build a plan for sort of that learning, right? Because we're not always, and I can tell you, I'm not always in the mode to learn new things. And so I also need breaks. And so I build the time in to take the rest, recovery, create space, like allocate tasks, other things to other people, and then create opportunities to do learning. Like I try to save a couple hours a day and do some learning, a couple hours a week to do some learning, depending on what it is, right? Because it does take a lot of energy. So that is my recommendation, that create the space and time to do it. Believe me, it's not solved and sorted, and everyone is at a different phase and in their journey. So do what makes sense for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time, Leena.
That was Jenny Truong, 14 years at Meta, and one of the clearest thinkers I have spoken to about what execution actually requires when AI is involved. If something she said landed, the ownership question, the decision under uncertainty, the barriers that don't show up in panel discussion, share this episode with one person who needs to hear it. This is Agentic AI Execution. Until next time, stay curious, keep building, and bring someone along for the ride. See you next time.